welcome back to the Kirkpatrick podcast. It is Vanessa, and I am so excited to be back on the podcast and here with another one of the contributors to the book, Ted Kniker. If you do not remember, or are a newer subscriber to the podcast, Ted was on the podcast probably almost like a year and a half ago. A really great episode, actually one of our top ranked episodes, where he was talking about how he came to the model and what he's learned from it and a little bit of background. He and I connected at a conference now 2 years ago. Maybe 3, actually. No, 2-ish. And, we just became fast friends ever since. And so when I was looking for folks who could write about how they've used the Kirkpatrick model in non-traditional ways, Ted was probably the first person I wrote down to be one of my contributors. So his chapter is all about how you take the model and apply it to non-human interventions. And so we talk a little bit about that in the podcast as well. But for today, we're going to be talking about something different because it is a huge theme in the book and a huge passion of ours at Kirkpatrick. How do you scale evaluation? How do you embed it throughout the entire organization? And given his amazing background and experience, I thought he was the best person to talk about this today. And so that was a lot of rambling. Ted, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Vanessa. It's wonderful to be here again. And as always, awesome to see you.
Yes. So I think the last time we saw each other was the Kirkpatrick Summit in September. That feels like just yesterday. It's wild.
It does.
Well, for those of the subscribers that may not know you as well, do you mind giving a little bit of background of your background, experience, and the work that you're doing now?
Sure. So I am an evaluator. I spent about 24 years in federal government service. And the last part of that, I was chief of evaluation for the U.S. Department of State and its public diplomacy programs, moved into consulting and into organizational development consulting, and of course brought performance measurement and evaluation. But I'm also a professor, I'm a trainer, and so I really specialize in doing training needs assessments, and then on the other end, training effectiveness evaluation, and currently co-founder of my own consulting company. So we do consulting, facilitation, coaching, all about organizational performance improvement.
Amazing. So today we're talking about what it takes to actually scale evaluation. So my first question for you, Ted, is when organizations say they want to scale evaluation, what does that mean to you? And what are they usually getting wrong?
I think when I hear that from an organization that they want to scale something, it usually means that they want to take a function that's working well in one place and multiply that or repeat it across an entire organization. Mm-hmm. The problem, though, that I see with that is often that organizations will focus on the tools and the activities, and that's what they try to reproduce. But what they don't do is start with what their purpose is, their governance, and how they're going to use that to make decisions. So, what I think organizations usually get wrong is that they think scaling, especially in evaluation, means increasing activity. So more dashboards, more surveys, more reports, more metrics. But really, that's not scale. That's just multiplication of noise. And so real scaling means that what they're doing is aligning. So they have, instead of having different parts of the organization doing different things, you end up bringing together, having kind of shared logic about what success looks like, how it's measured, and how that information is going to be used to improve performance.
You bring up something that I didn't really think about, but I think is a misstep. And what you're talking about to me is like the first step is alignment, right? So the organization needs to be aligned, right? And you need to have like the governance pieces in place and all of that. And you said, the purpose and the shared values. Like we mistake or forget that we had that as a team, or we built towards it, right? Because we know we need to, evaluate, and we want to improve our programs, and we want to better the work that we do. And we fundamentally understand the importance, and we forget that we did have to build that at some point. It might have been like 45 years ago, but we had to build that same alignment at some point and understanding. And we assume, what happens when you assume, that the rest of the organization just fundamentally knows why this is important and valuable. And so, I want to thank you for bringing that. And I swear you all, I did not prompt him on what to say. I never prompt any of my guests, including my own daughters, into what to say. So I never know. You never know what you're going to get. I thank you for bringing that to our attention, because I do think it's fundamentally so important. So there's two different kinds of evaluation, right? So there's program level evaluation, and then there's enterprise-wide evaluation. So in your opinion, what makes scaling at the enterprise level fundamentally different than at the program level?
I think, part of it is what you look at for success. So, at a scale question, it's not really, at a program level, you're looking at, did the team evaluate something well? But at an organizational or enterprise level, it really is, can the organization learn across different teams? And I think, at the program level, having been an evaluator at the program level, and then actually was tagged to then become the evaluator across multiple levels, what I saw was that at the local level, there are a lot of workarounds. There's a lot deeper understanding of things. And you can have a really strong evaluator and a really strong evaluation team that produces really useful information. But at the enterprise level, that's never going to be enough, because what is needed is having that consistency across the units, having common definitions. That was one thing we ran into when we were doing things across multiple units, even though we were in the same general sector. We defined things so differently. And then you didn't have leadership agreement on what was most important. And it was a little harder to connect the local evaluation work to the enterprise level goals and performance. So, I think it's really easy, and especially with my background in the federal government, it's really easy to find pockets of excellent evaluation, but those pockets within different departments or agencies don't add up to enterprise capability because they're not connected. So I think program evaluation can succeed at a talent level, but enterprise evaluation has to succeed through systems.
Oh, Ted, That was drop the mic. I think we're done with the episode, y'all. That was good. I mean, you're right. It also takes you're looking also at different metrics, I think. So I had a conversation earlier. I was prepping for this week-long free conference virtual summit that we're putting on with a few different organizations, and I was prepping the Monday session, and it's a conversation, but with a facilitated conversation with a former CFO, and he said something during the call about, it's not that I'm looking at, like, for example, individual productivity. I'm looking at organizational productivity. Is the organization productive, right? And I think when we stick to only evaluating at the program level, you can, to your point, get by with like the individual metrics. That's what we're looking at, right? Did people change behavior? But this idea to also roll it up to say, okay, what does that mean for the organization? Which, yes, that's like level 4, but you have to do a little bit more work and a little bit more understanding and evaluation. You have to have a different skill set in order to do that. The other thing for me that hit was you sharing, even though we're in the same organization, we're defining things differently. And that happens all the time. And that's why in our workshops, we started doing, like in our mindset workshops or alignment, how do we develop a glossary that we then publish out to the organization and say, when we say this is what we mean, and get that sort of shared agreement and make it a living, breathing thing. So as things change, right, we can grow and evolve. I think there's this understanding that we all work for the same organizations, we all speak the same language, but that's not even true, not even close.
Now, that's such a key point, because culture is one of the fundamental factors that lead to culture is shared language and shared understanding of meaning.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, priorities become different.
Yeah.
And different preferences and experiences end up fragmenting an organization instead of bringing it together.
Yes, absolutely. Oof. It's such a good episode. I can't wait for it to come out. Okay. Okay. Why, in your opinion, does strong evaluation on one team or in one area not translate across an enterprise? And then how can you know that it's not working before it's too late?
Well, I like the analogy when you see strong performance, and again, like silos of excellence, as we call them. I like the analogy that a lighthouse is helpful, but one lighthouse does not light the whole coast. And because good evaluation doesn't transfer or spread by osmosis. Many organizations, what works in one unit can be admired, but it's not adapted or adopted. And because there's really no way to translate that into an enterprise practice. So one team can be really strong, again, can have a great evaluator, supportive leader, or a unique culture. But unless the organization builds common expectations and shared methods, decision routines, leadership support, all that success is going to stay local. And so when we see that it's not working well, I think there are a few warning signs. What you'll see is leaders are seeing, for example, lots of reports, but they're not getting clarity on what's actually happening from kind of a holistic perspective. Teams are collecting maybe very similar data, but in different ways. So they, again, have different definitions, different collection methodologies, different analysis techniques for it. People spend more time defending numbers than actually using them. So I think that's a good sign. You got your measures, they multiply, but the decisions don't improve. And when you start hearing phrases like, we have data everywhere, but we still don't know what's really happening, I think is a really key signal. But for me, the biggest red flag is when I hear an organization say that it's information rich, but decision poor. Because why are you collecting all of that? And why are you looking at the whole enterprise to have this kind of activity going on? It's so that you can inform better decisions and better judgment to larger, more complex issues.
Information rich, data poor. I think a lot of people listening felt that one in their soul and in their gut. And it's a lot that what we talk about, right? All the reports in the world are not going to do anything if you can't make a decision or understand the insight. And I love what you said about having different ways of analyzing data. Someone said to me the other day, I can make anything look the way that I want it to. I can make a program look real good, right? It's because I can pick and choose the data and how I slice and dice it and what I pull out of it. And I think that's so true, right? We can make anything look the way that we want it to. And that is a danger when it comes to not having a similar process for how you're going to analyze the data and something consistent in order to do that.
Right.
In your opinion, what role do leaders play in whether evaluation scales successfully?
They play a critical role. So one of the things I'm fortunate enough to do as a professor is I actually teach senior level leaders how to use evaluation from an executive perspective, because they have to be decisive and supportive about evaluation, because what the leader does signals whether evaluation is a compliance exercise, a political weapon, or a genuine learning function. And if leaders are asking for data, but they punish truth, evaluation will never scale well.
I'm gone, y'all. I'm done.
I think
do this whole podcast.
Leaders need to model curiosity. They need to ask consistent questions, prioritize evidence and evidence building, and use evaluation to improve rather than blame and shame. And when evaluation has that chance to become part of the discussion, and it has a seat at the table, that's when it becomes more enterprise-wide. I saw that in my own. It's once I had other leaders in the organization actually using and talking about the evaluations that we did for them, that was when it spread. It wasn't me going out and evangelizing why evaluation was important. It was when peers, mid-level and senior leaders were seeing what evaluation, how it answered questions for them, how it helped them have a better understanding, and again, to make better choices. Because I think what we saw was that evaluation scales when leaders reward learning and not just good news. I've seen the other side too, where I'll just say I worked for a leader, I was a couple levels below, who only reported the good news. And I'll just say at one point in his career, he was escorted out of the building.
Well, the amount of nuggets you just dropped, I'm shooketh. And What's interesting is if all you're reporting is good news, right? Which we also tend to do in evaluations, especially when you stick to those lower levels, levels 1 and 2, right? Because everything looks really, really good.
Right.
Why does your budget keep shrinking? Why are you the first to get cut? And so to your point, I think, at some point, everyone gets found out, right? I mean, everyone kind of looks sideways at the data like, oh yeah, your NPS score was a 9. Like, okay. But inside, they're probably saying, I just I'm not really seeing the return on the organization and and all of those things. But, times are okay. I know that we need to have training, so I'm not going to really dig too deep into the data right now or really push back. But then when they are given the task of, we've got to make some cuts, we've got to deprioritize some things, defend some things, those programs that were scoring so high end up being some of the first, right? And so that was really important what you shared. And one of the pieces in the book that we talk about, building a culture of evaluation, what are the pieces that you need? And there's 4 pieces of it. One of them is commitment, right? We're going to commit to doing this. It's going to take time. It's not always going to be pretty, but the end is going to be so great, right? So, we talk about in the book and we talk about in the Kirkpatrick programs, selling the vacation, right? It's a concept I learned through someone that does sales, business training. And it's, if you can sell what the end result is going to look like, you are going to be okay with, the whole process of going to the airport, going through TSA, maybe having to take your shoes off because you forgot to put your TSA pre-check number in your ticket, right? And, up until recently, right, wait on 3-hour long lines at security, right? Because once you finally get to that destination, you're going to be, pick your poison, whether you're a mountain, a beach, or a farm person, but you're going to be at a place that is, your relaxing place where you're going to have a great time and you're going to be able to enjoy yourself and really, de-stress. And it's just things are going to be better. So you put up with all of the junk of going on the trip, right? And I think that's like that piece of commitment, right? With the culture of evaluation, like if we are so short-sighted to think that number one, this is going to take 1 year to do, and we don't really continuously talk about the vision and where we're going, then yes, when we're going through TSA or going through, and much love to TSA to be clear, but we're going through security, when we're dealing with, delays, when we're dealing with lost luggage, all of those pieces, right? Or when your luggage is overweight and you have to take out a shoe, right, to bring it under the 50 pounds, which usually happens to me, I'm going to say, you know what? I don't want to do this. This doesn't feel fun. This doesn't feel great. So that's one piece. The second piece, though, is courage and trust. To your point, is really having the courage and the trust to be able to fail forward, right? And know that failures are going to happen. I might put my neck on the line and say, you know what? I think this is going to work. And then when we evaluate it, it ended up not working, right? But that's okay because we actually learned something, right? And my job's not on the line because I discovered something didn't work, So I think those are like 2 crucial pieces that if you don't do those 2 things, the rest of it doesn't matter, honestly.
Absolutely. And and that's where I think, as we were talking earlier, that difference between program evaluation and enterprise is that program evaluation, it's much easier to make things look good because it's isolated in its context.
Yeah.
And what tends to be missed is what's the contribution to the larger goal. That was one thing that helped my evaluation unit really take off, was even though we were doing program evaluation, we always had components of how do the goals and the objectives of a particular program align with and contribute to movement to the larger strategic goals of the enterprise? Another thing that we learned really early too was that a lot of organizations think that what they have to do is they have to have or standardize at the measures level. And we found that that's not the case. You really, where you want to ensure that you have some standardization is at the goal or the outcome level. Because, in our model, it really is at the, results level. So for example, if an organization is funding STEM programs, and you have a program that's focused on teacher preparation so that they can better teach STEM. And then you have another program that's focused on students. And that might be, science fairs or practical, application of STEM knowledge. And then there's a third one on awareness of how important STEM is to the economy, and it might be, let's say, a college prep course, or that's, the purpose. Those three programs, you're not going to measure them the same way, because you're not going to measure a science fair, an information campaign, and a student learning program with the same things. But they're all contributing to the goal or the objective of increasing STEM participation, knowledge, and use. And so that's really where I think part of this also comes. And I think organizations have a hard time making that connection between the objectives of a program and how it contributes to the strategic objectives and goals.
I was reading some criticisms of the model on the LinkedIn last week, and why, Kirkpatrick needs to go, because there's no standard level 1 survey, level 2, measurement. And to your point, I was looking at that, and I don't really engage, right? Because I think that everyone should be able to say their piece. And I also get some really good, it gives me a different perspective, right? Luckily for me, I was going to say I didn't create the model. I did update it. So now I'm going to have a little bit more of like a personal feel. Before it was like, it's not really my work. I might own the model, but, I didn't create it. Now I'm going to have some more feels maybe. And to your point, I was thinking, like, okay, I get that. And there's so many different initiatives, programs that you could measure. One singular survey or mechanism or measurement tool isn't going to be able to be applied. This one for this for this, and it does, it takes a little bit more work, to your point, if you want to like pull data together. And, it would be nice if there was just click up, here's the survey and we just apply it no matter what, right? And there was that consistency, but I don't think you would get the richness of the data, and it really wouldn't apply. So I love what you said about standardizing the outcomes piece of it, because that should be standardized across the board. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to talk a little about structure and governance.
Okay.
Because you've alluded a little bit to it. What is the signal or that point in which okay, we need structure and not individual effort?
That's a great question. I think what I've experienced is that effort is what can start evaluation, and it kind of is what fuels it. but structure is what sustains it.
Mhm.
And the moment you want comparability and consistency and enterprise learning,
Mhm.
you need structure.
Mhm.
And so, when once more than kind of a few teams are involved, again, effort alone is not going to really sustain that. I always say, goodwill's not enough.
Mhm.
Talent is not enough. You need standards, you need the governance,
Yes.
you need the common definitions and roles and decision processes. Because I think one of the major issues that we see in any organization is a lack of clarity around roles. And especially when it gets into data, who owns the data, who analyzes the data, who's in charge of the process to actually interpret and kind of use the data as well. And if that's really kind of left loosey goosey, you're not going to end up having, again, the enterprise learning
Yeah.
or success in that.
Why do you think there's resistance to putting structure in place? Or do you think that there's resistance?
I do. And I think a lot of it is people are afraid that and there are a number of reasons. I think it's that they're afraid that it's going to create more bureaucracy.
Mhm.
Um, and, um, and people are comfortable in knowing what they know and operating within the system that works for them. And that once you start building those kind of governance structures and systems, they have to adapt. And that can be a loss because it may mean, a fear of, well, if everything's standardized, then, the uniqueness of our program or our function won't be seen.
Yeah.
So I think you have to have the standards, but that doesn't mean everything is uniform.
Yes.
I
Thank you.
think, governance is not the enemy of learning. Bad governance is, right? And it goes back to this idea, I think, of trust, because when you have different parts of the organization doing things differently, and if that's not well understood by leadership, it doesn't build confidence. And when you don't build confidence, you will lose trust.
I appreciate what you said so, so, so much, that standards do not equal uniformity. I think that's
Mhm.
a huge challenge for people to overcome, is this idea that, well, it's a standardized way. That's how, everyone has to do it the exact same way. And that's not exactly what we're saying. You can still have your differences and your complexities, especially when we talk about, different units, departments, that, things are not going to be exactly one for one, right? So one of the biggest, I'm sure, challenges for organizations, when they think about the model, is level 2 is actually going to be the biggest challenge when you scale it outside of the learning function, right? Because we don't do training here. So what
Right.
is level 2, right? And how does it apply to
Mhm.
us? And I got some stuff coming for that. But the idea, right, that there is a level 2, that it's about learning, it's about readiness and capability, right? It's about
Mhm.
that. And then once
Right.
you can better understand what the intent is of that level, then you can make those adjustments, right? And I volunteer for my sorority, and we've got, chapters all over the country, all these different universities. What works at an SEC school is not going to work up in the Northeast at a small, independent
Mhm.
college, where you have a lot of, not even a lot of students, let alone a lot of history with, Greek life, and all of these things are just, the demographics are just absolutely different. And the challenge I always see, because I sat at that executive board level, was everyone was trying to push out the same thing, the same model, no matter the campus, right? And then we would start to see these failures happen at certain chapters. And at one point, we closed we're talking about closing one of the chapters. I always get emotional. I would always get emotional 2 times. One, we were expelling a member, even if it was absolutely egregious, because I knew the power of being in a values-based organization with, other people who are, like-minded and things like that, like what that could do for you. So that stunk. And when I had to close chapters, right? And knowing, again, you're taking that away. I remember sitting around the table and I looked at my colleagues and I said, this wasn't their failure. This was us. We failed them because we tried to prescribe exactly what, take this model and apply it to this university. And that wasn't reality. And we're forgetting that we can have these standards, but how we actually adjust them and execute them may need to look different. And there are certain things that need to be uniform across the board. But to your point, that's the results level, right? That's that top level. Things underneath it do not need to be uniform. So I want to thank you for bringing that up, because I think I wouldn't have necessarily thought of that or gone there, but you're giving me a lot to noodle on today.
Well, and I think part of that too is if organizations are going to resist structure if they're confusing it with rigidity. And what ends up happening is especially at that enterprise level, when you don't have some kind of standardization, what you're really doing is undermining credibility of things, because you can't put together, again, what all of this says. And so what I see is that tends to lead to a lot of organizations being more confused, having more redundancy, and again, dropping or decreasing in trust because they're not speaking the same language.
What happens when leaders stop trusting the data?
Oh, that's a real big problem. And I think, when leaders don't trust data, typically one of two things happens. You either get decision-making that will revert to instinct, politics, and anecdotes, or leaders will start asking for more data and more analysis without then using it. So it creates more activity. And neither of those kinds of things are healthy. And in those cases, then evaluation stops becoming a strategic asset for them. And so, when trust goes down, or when trust and evidence goes down, opinion's going to rush in. And it becomes, I think too, one of the things that ends up happening is then decisions continuously get kind of relitigated, and you don't really move forward as an organization.
Touched on a nerve on that one. Thank you. Gonna leave that there because that was really good. So when we talk about this enterprise decision making, right? So to your point, hopefully not relitigating decisions. How should we have evaluation show up? What's that language? What's that lens? How can we ensure that it shows up?
It's got to be in the DNA and the bloodstream of the organization, not an appendix or, an easily removable, skin tag.
Can't be the E at the end of a framework, like maybe Addie. No, to call
Yeah, because, because evaluation only appears kind of after decisions, it's too late. Right. I think how it shows up is it's got to show up early.
Yeah.
It has to be part of the planning process. When we're looking at whatever situation we want to respond to, and we're creating our initiatives or interventions or resolutions, a as important question, I'll say, as what are we going to do? The most important question is what are we trying to solve, and what does that look like? And can we paint that picture? But just as important as what are we going to do is, and how are we going to know that we were successful? And so evaluation's got to help shape strategy and resource allocation and inform our improvement priorities, and what course corrections are going to happen. I think it's and how that actually shows up in kind of a practical way is it's got to go beyond, showing up once a quarter in, a 2-hour meeting, or a slide deck. It really has to be the part of how leaders think, and prioritize and organize. I tend to see that the real test for evaluation and whether it's really showing up well in an enterprise is if the evaluation or the findings or results of an evaluation are influencing priorities and decisions, as opposed to just producing reports.
Yeah.
If evaluation becomes credenza-ware, it's a waste of resources.
Credenza-ware, I like that. Okay. You know me, I love making it practical and I love making it applicable. And we always have to start with one step, right? So like I always say, you don't come out of your mama's womb walking or running. Fortunately not. You come out and you pick your head up, and then you sit on your bum, and then maybe you lift yourself up. Then you take some assisted steps, and then eventually you walk and you run. What is that first step in order to scale evaluation?
I think it starts with alignment, not tools. Again, I wouldn't worry about the surveys. And you have to get clear on what is most important or matters most to the enterprise. And then define a small number of outcomes. And what are the core questions that you have about those outcomes? So in the federal government, we recently, 2018, had the Foundations of Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. And one of the requirements there is that departments have to come up with learning agendas. So they have to, start asking the questions, what is it that we need to know or want to know about our policies or programs? And I think that's what has to be done first, is really understanding what are the outcomes that we're trying to use, and then apply the evaluation to a real decision.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the big first step is what is it that you either want to know or what is it that you want to do, what kind of act, because, I think too many organizations try and start with dashboards and not decisions. And if you are putting all that effort into making garbage look pretty, again, that's not going to move the organization forward.
What are you looking forward to next?
I'm looking forward to the evaluation book actually coming out in physical form.
I know. Touch it.
I'm really excited about it. I think that it's probably the hardest thing that when I'm working in evaluation is that it is not part of a culture. Yeah. It's still seen, when I go into many organizations, it's still seen as there's this office kind of down the hall or on the in the basement that does the
We
evaluation
are
work.
relegated to the basement. You're right.
Yeah. And, and what we're trying to do is get people to understand that evaluative thinking is leadership. It's part of leadership. It's one of the things that we actually have to do. And so, if we go back to the old Shewhart cycle, plan, do, check, act, or plan, do, study, act, at some point, we have to study and we have to measure and we have to answer questions so that we can improve. And I think, the goal of any evaluation is to improve the policy or the program or, what's under review or the organization. But it also can make a huge difference in the culture. And I think, we talked about this a little bit in the last podcast. That's what I noticed was that when evaluation really took off, when in our organization, I noticed it not because I got a bigger budget or because I was doing more projects. I noticed it when I'm in the elevator and a program manager starts talking to their colleague and they're talking about, instead of all their activity, what are the outcomes that they're achieving?
Right.
And they have data about that. And they get excited. And then that prompts them to ask more questions, to understand what are the drivers of change, what are the trends that we're seeing, and what are those things that we don't know yet that maybe an evaluation will help us learn. So I'm looking forward to the book contributing to building more evaluation culture.
Well, and you bring up a really great point. You end up building fans, and everyone wants social proof and testimonials and who has this worked for, because this is a lot of work. And so when you have, when you start, little by little, person by person, department, whatever way, and they're starting to get excited and they're talking about it, and they're going, what do you do when you find, something that you really enjoy? You tell a friend that you think is going to also, really benefit from that thing that you enjoyed or you did. And so that's how that also starts to spread. You almost want to create super fans of evaluation.
Absolutely. It's no, and it's viral marketing.
Yeah.
You want somebody else, if somebody else is talking about, the good that you brought them from an evaluation. Again, in my story, that was the turning point.
Yeah.
Was when someone else did that, and I could sit there humbly, knowing we had done a great job, of course, but but sit back and watch mouths drop and people say, "How can I get that kind of data for my program?"
Ted, this was an incredible episode. I snuck a photo because I wanted to remember this forever. Just so you know. I will share it with you. I will.
Thank you.
Friends, if you want to connect with Ted, I absolutely recommend it. I will make sure that his LinkedIn link profile is in the show notes and in the description of the YouTube video. Ted, thank you so much for writing a chapter. I know that's not easy. Now having written a book. Thank you for, being here today and in the past, but really, championing the work that we're doing and continuing to spread the work of the model and the work that's coming. I could not thank you enough. And I really appreciate your time today. And friends, please, leave your questions, comments, concerns in the notes below or in the comments below. We really would love to hear your feedback on this episode. Thank you, Ted.